Imagine telling an ancient hunter-gatherer this: I just spent an hour running and I didn't go anywhere. I didn't hunt. I didn't escape danger. I didn't collect food. I just burned calories on purpose. They would probably think you'd lost your mind. Because for almost all of human history, wasting energy was one of the fastest ways to die. So why do modern humans believe the exact opposite? Because to him, a healthy person would never willingly waste that much energy, unless something had gone terribly wrong. Modern life tells us a completely different story. It tells us that if you don't enjoy exercise, you're fighting against discipline. That somewhere inside you is a lazy version of yourself constantly trying to avoid becoming healthier. It's such a common belief that we rarely stop to question it. But what if that feeling isn't a flaw? What if it's evidence that your brain is still following instructions written hundreds of thousands of years before the first gym was ever built? Because here's something that sounds almost impossible. For nearly all of human history, exercise as we understand it today didn't exist. Humans walked. They climbed cliffs. They carried children. They chased animals across open plains. They dug for roots. They gathered firewood. They swam rivers. They hauled enormous carcasses back to camp. But they almost never moved simply for the sake of moving. That idea is astonishingly new, and the reason has almost nothing to do with motivation. It has everything to do with survival. Let's start with a question that sounds simple until you actually try to answer it. Why does your body constantly look for the easier option? You're standing in front of an escalator and a staircase. Before you've consciously decided anything, your feet are already drifting toward the escalator. You're carrying grocery bags. Without thinking, you make 2 smaller trips instead of 1 heavier trip. You park near the entrance. You sit instead of stand. You reach for the remote instead of getting up. Afterward, you might feel guilty. But guilt comes later. The decision comes first. That tiny gap between instinct and guilt is where this entire story begins. For a long time, scientists assumed humans simply lacked enough self-control. Then evolutionary biologists started asking a different question. What if conserving energy wasn't a bug in the human brain? What if it was one of its greatest achievements? Harvard evolutionary biologist Daniel Lieberman has spent decades studying how humans evolved to move, from fossil skeletons to modern hunter-gatherer societies. One of his most important conclusions isn't that humans evolved to love exercise. It's almost the opposite. Humans evolved to be physically active when activity solved a problem, and to avoid unnecessary effort whenever it didn't. At first, that sounds disappointing. Surely evolution should have rewarded the people who worked the hardest. Except evolution has never cared about hard work. Evolution cares about surviving long enough to leave descendants. Those are very different things. Imagine it's 150,000 years ago. You've spent the entire morning following fresh antelope tracks across dry grassland. The sun is directly overhead. Your water is almost gone. After 6 hours, the trail disappears. The hunt has failed. Now imagine one member of your group suddenly announces that everyone should sprint around the valley a few more times. Not because they'll find food, not because danger is nearby, just to improve their fitness. The group wouldn't admire that person. They'd probably think they were sick. Because every extra calorie burned today was 1 less calorie available tomorrow. And tomorrow wasn't guaranteed. That's easy to forget when your next meal is waiting in a refrigerator. Your ancestors didn't have refrigerators. They had uncertainty. Some days ended with a successful hunt. Others ended with hungry children falling asleep beside a fire. Nobody knew which tomorrow they were walking toward. In that world, wasting energy wasn't a sign of determination. It was a gamble, and nature is remarkably unforgiving to gamblers. Which raises a much bigger question. If ancient humans worked so hard to conserve energy, then why did they become one of the greatest long-distance travelers the world has ever known? At first glance, those two ideas seem impossible to reconcile, but they're actually 2 halves of the same survival strategy. And that's where the story takes a turn that most people never see coming. But first, we need to get rid of one of the biggest myths about our ancestors. People often imagine prehistoric humans as relentless machines, always running, always hunting, always fighting to survive. Hollywood loves this version of history. It's exciting, it's dramatic, it's also misleading. If you could watch an average hunter-gatherer for an entire week, you'd probably be surprised by how ordinary much of it looked. There were moments of intense effort, a hunt, a climb, a dangerous river crossing, carrying firewood back to camp before sunset. But between those moments, people rested, they talked, they repaired tools, they prepared food, they watched children play, they sat around fires telling stories that no archaeologist will ever hear. Life wasn't one endless workout. It was a series of problems separated by long stretches of recovery. And strangely enough, that's exactly what your own body still expects. Researchers studying modern hunter-gatherer groups have repeatedly found that they don't spend every hour pushing themselves to exhaustion. Instead, they move at a comfortable pace for most of the day, walking from one food source to another, searching, gathering, tracking, carrying. Almost none of it would look like exercise to you, yet by sunset, they may have walked 10 or even 15 miles without ever deciding to go for a walk. Movement wasn't an event. It was simply woven into life itself. Now compare that with your average Tuesday. You wake up, walk 20 steps to the kitchen, sit for breakfast, sit in a car, sit at a desk, Sit through meetings, sit during lunch, sit on the drive home. Then, after barely moving for 8 hours, you suddenly decide it's time to become physically active for 45 minutes, on purpose, inside a building. That would have seemed far stranger to your ancestors than walking 15 miles, because they never separated movement from living. We did. And that distinction may explain why exercise often feels like a chore. Think about a dog. Nobody has to convince a sheepdog to herd sheep. Nobody has to motivate an otter to swim. Nobody offers a wolf a reward for chasing prey. Those behaviors have purpose. Purpose creates motivation. Remove the purpose, and motivation often disappears. Humans may not be so different. Your brain evolved in a world where movement answered a question. Where is water? Where are the berries? Where did the herd go? Can we reach shelter before dark? Every journey ended with information. Every climb revealed something. Every hunt carried the possibility of success. Now consider a treadmill. You walk. The view never changes. You solve no problems. You discover nothing. You arrive exactly where you started. Your muscles understand the movement. Your brain quietly wonders why you're doing it. That's an evolutionary mismatch, not proof that you're lazy. In fact, one of the most fascinating discoveries in evolutionary biology is that humans are incredibly efficient walkers. Our long legs reduce the energy needed for every stride. The arch of your foot acts like a spring, storing and releasing energy with each step. Your Achilles tendon returns part of the force from one stride into the next. Even your ability to sweat across almost your entire body allows you to travel long distances without overheating in conditions that force many other mammals to stop. None of these adaptations appeared because our ancestors enjoyed exercise. They appeared because efficient movement helped them survive. Efficiency is the key word. Imagine two travelers crossing a desert. One burns through all his water by marching at full speed from sunrise until noon. The other walks steadily, rests in the hottest hours, and continues later in the afternoon. Who reaches the next waterhole? The faster traveler isn't necessarily the better survivor. The more efficient one usually is. Evolution quietly rewarded efficiency for hundreds of thousands of years. That's why your brain is constantly asking an invisible question. Is this movement worth the energy? Most of the time, you never hear the question. You only notice the answer. The elevator looks more appealing. The chair feels more comfortable. The shortcut seems more attractive. Your instincts are doing exactly what they evolved to do. The problem is that the world around them has changed faster than evolution ever could. For nearly all of human history, conserving energy increased your chances of surviving. Today, in many parts of the world, food is abundant while movement has become optional. The ancient strategy still exists, only the environment has changed. And that may be one of the greatest ironies in human history. The same instinct that once helped your ancestors survive harsh winters, failed hunts, and long migrations now whispers that taking another walk can wait until tomorrow. It isn't trying to sabotage your health. It's trying to protect you using a survival manual written for a world that disappeared thousands of years ago. But here's the twist. If conserving energy was so important, why did evolution transform humans into one of the greatest endurance species the planet has ever seen? Why did our ancestors develop bodies capable of walking across continents if they were also trying to avoid wasting effort? The answer lies in one extraordinary hunting strategy that almost no other animal could ever attempt. And once you understand it, you'll never think about walking the same way again.